This story is about to reveal the secret weapon Hitler never knew he faced. The Ritchie Boys, a remarkable group of Jewish refugees who returned to the war not as soldiers wielding rifles, but as master psychologists and interrogators, using the German language and culture they fled to dismantle the Nazi regime from the inside out. They were the enemy's sons, men born in Germany who spoke German better than English, and who knew the customs, the fears, and the very soul of the Nazi regime better than any American ever could. They wore the U.S. Army uniform, but their true weapon wasn't a rifle or a tank. It was the power of language. Their mission was one of the greatest secrets of World War II. They were trained not for combat, but for deception, interrogation, and psychological warfare. They were a secret unit forged in the hills of Maryland at an isolated military training center known as Camp Ritchie. They were the Ritchie Boys, and they were arguably one of the most effective and unsung forces in the entire Allied victory. By the end of the war, they made up the vast majority of all interrogators on the Western Front. This is the story of how a few thousand Jewish refugees and political exiles, men whom Hitler wanted dead, came back to fight him, not with bullets, but with brilliance. To understand the Ritchie Boys, we must first understand the early 1930s. As Hitler rose to power, tens of thousands of Jewish families and political dissidents fled Germany. Many of these refugees, often teenagers or young men, ended up in America. They quickly enlisted when the United States entered the war, desperate to fight the tyranny they had escaped. The U.S. Army had a unique problem. They desperately needed skilled interrogators and intelligence analysts who could speak perfect German. They needed men who understood the complex German military ranks, the regional dialects, and the subtle cultural cues that could reveal a lie. In 1942, the Military Intelligence Training Center was established at Camp Ritchie in Maryland. The recruitment was straightforward. They specifically sought men who were German, Austrian, or Hungarian speakers, who had lived under the Nazi regime and possessed above-average intelligence. Around 15,000 men passed through Camp Ritchie, learning skills far beyond the typical GI training. They were taught highly specialized military intelligence, which included everything from map reading and decoding to running POW camps. But their most critical training focused on interrogation and psychological warfare. These weren't common soldiers. They were scholars, musicians, lawyers, and students, all united by a profound personal score to settle with Nazism. The training at Camp Ritchie was rigorous and innovative. The instructors knew that brutal, traditional interrogation methods were often useless. Fear only makes a man clam up. To get information, you had to be a master of psychology. The key Ritchie technique was known as the soft approach. Trainees learned to use empathy, flattery, and psychological manipulation. For example, they were taught to offer a German POW a cigarette, coffee, or a comfortable chair, then casually ask questions about things they wanted to talk about, like the quality of their rations or the incompetence of their officers. The necessary military intelligence would be slipped in almost as an afterthought. They had to be able to assess an enemy soldier instantly. Was he a devoted Nazi, a disillusioned conscript, or a professional soldier just doing his job? The approach changed dramatically for each type. Beyond interrogation, they mastered propaganda and deception. They learned how to create and distribute leaflets designed to lower enemy morale, how to run mobile radio stations, broadcasting fake troop movements, and how to create psychological chaos behind the German lines. Their identity was their greatest asset, but also their greatest danger. If captured, their German accents and Jewish heritage meant they would face certain execution, not as POWs, but as traitors. This heightened the stakes for every single mission they undertook. When the Allies landed on the beaches of Normandy on D-Day, June 6, 1944, the Ritchie Boys were among the very first to hit the sand. They weren't fighting for ground. They were fighting for information. Within hours of the landing, the first German prisoners were being brought in, and the Ritchie Boys were ready. Their job was crucial: intercept, interrogate, and analyze. They often had only minutes to extract life-saving intelligence. One critical moment came in the first few days. A Ritchie boy successfully interrogated a captured German officer. The man was arrogant and resistant, but the interrogator, speaking his perfect Bavarian dialect, casually tricked him into revealing the location and planned route of a crucial German tank division, the Panzer Lehr. This intelligence was immediately passed up the chain of command, allowing Allied bombers to smash the Panzer Lehr division before it could ever reach the invasion beaches. This quick-witted interrogation saved thousands of Allied lives and potentially secured the success of the entire Normandy operation. Throughout the rapid Allied advance, the Ritchie Boys were everywhere. They traveled with combat units, working out of tents, ruined houses, and even captured German offices. They identified hidden minefields. They uncovered secret ammunition dumps. They discovered the exact location of V-2 rocket launch sites. By the Battle of the Bulge, the entire U.S. Third Army was relying on the intelligence gleaned by the Ritchie Boys to stay ahead of the desperate German counteroffensives. Their work was the crucial feedback loop that allowed Allied command to anticipate and react to German moves faster than the Germans could execute them. As the war pushed deeper into Germany in 1945, the Ritchie Boys took on their most emotionally grueling mission, confronting the reality of the Holocaust. Many of these young men were the first Allied soldiers to enter the concentration camps. They found the unimaginable. Men who had fled Germany years earlier were now faced with the horrors suffered by the families and friends they left behind. Their job wasn't to look away, it was to document. They interrogated camp guards, compiled evidence for the coming war crimes tribunals, and helped identify the atrocities committed in places like Dachau and Buchenwald. Their personal experiences with the Nazi regime made their testimony and documentation absolutely vital. It was the ultimate horrific convergence of their past and their present, fighting the perpetrators of the genocide that defined their young lives. By the end of the war, the Ritchie Boys had received thousands of decorations for their courage and effectiveness, but they were ordered to maintain secrecy about their training and their specialized role. Their contributions were so vital that military historians now credit their intelligence work as a force multiplier, the crucial element that made the Allies' numerical and industrial advantage actually work on the ground. When the war ended, many of the Ritchie Boys continued to serve, becoming key translators during the Nuremberg trials, ensuring the testimony of victims and the confessions of Nazi leaders were accurately recorded. Yet, after the trials, they faded back into civilian life, rarely speaking of their secret war. They became successful doctors, engineers, writers, and artists, shaping post-war America. It wasn't until decades later that historians began to uncover the full scope of their contributions. The Ritchie Boys were the embodiment of intellectual warfare. They traded a gun for a psychological weapon and proved that language, intelligence, and a deep understanding of the enemy can be as decisive as any division of tanks. Their story is a powerful reminder that not all heroes fight on the front line, and that sometimes the greatest contribution to victory is made by the quiet analysts working in the interrogation tent.